So welcome, Professor Kundu. It's a pleasure to have you on board, and we look forward to the insights that you are going to share. Our
Thank you.
next panelist is Professor David Wasieleski. Professor Wasieleski is the Albert D. Virag Professor of Business Ethics in the Colombo Donoghue School of Business at Duquesne University and Executive Director of the Albert Paul Virag Institute for Business Ethics at Duquesne. His academic research focuses on natural science approaches to understanding ethical decision making and the formation of social contracts within organizational contexts. He also studies the effects of cognitive biases and moral intensity on perceptions of ethical issues. His work has been published in Business and Society, Business Ethics Quarterly, Organization and Environment, Journal of Applied and Behavioral Sciences, and the Journal of Business Ethics. Currently, he is Editor-in-Chief of Business and Society Review. He serves as an Associate Editor for Behavioral Business Ethics for the Journal of Business Ethics and Associate Editor for the Humanistic Management Journal. His work on ethics and behavior has been cited in popular outlets such as New York Times, The Atlantic, and also on the BBC. Welcome, Professor Wasieleski. It's a pleasure to have you on the discussion with us. Our last panelist for the day is Professor Pawan Budhwar. Professor Pawan Budhwar is the 50th anniversary professor of International Human Resource Management and head of Aston Business School, Birmingham, UK. He is also the joint director of Aston India Centre for Applied Research and the co-editor-in-chief of British Journal of Management. Professor Budhwar is globally known for his research in the fields of strategic and international human resource management and emerging markets with a specific focus on India. He has published over 130 articles in leading journals and has also written and co-edited 25 books. Professor Budhwar is the co-founder and the first president of the Indian Academy of Management, in the aegis of which this event is being organized. He has served as an advisor to the Commonwealth Commission for 6 years and is a fellow of the Higher Education Academy, British Academy of Management, Indian Academy of Management, and the Academy of Social Sciences. He has won numerous awards for his research achievements and has regularly received research grants from a variety of funders. He sits on the panels of a number of national and international organizations. So welcome, Professor Budhwar, and we are delighted to have 4 esteemed faculty to share their insights and experiences on high quality publishing and doing relevant and impactful research. So let me just start by mentioning the format of the panel. We would, after the introductions, we would go to each panelist and we would request the panelists to make their opening comments, and the estimated time would be about 10 to 15 minutes per panelist, post which we would get into a free-flowing discussion. So all the participants who are listening to this talk, to the discussion, we would request you to put your questions, whatever questions, so let us keep it very interactive. So all the questions, please post it in the chat box, okay? And after the opening remarks by the panelists, we would take those questions up and try to answer your concerns, doubts, as much as possible. So let me, without any further ado, let me go straight away to our first panelist, Professor Vijay Pereira. And so Professor Pereira, we would want to hear from you your insights and experiences on doing impactful and relevant research. Essentially, how do we choose impactful and right research questions? And also, based on your experience of editing so many special issues as well as sitting on the boards of renowned journals, what do you consider as qualities of good research manuscripts? So, and apart from this, anything that you would want to share, that is also most welcome. So we would want to listen to your comments and
Thank you, Vishal.
let me know if you would want to share your screen or.
Yeah, Vishal, the voice, yeah, can you hear me?
Yes, yes, we can. Yes,
Okay.
I can. Yes.
So I will answer your question first, yeah, before I do my presentations for my two journals, yeah?
Okay, all right. Yes.
Yeah. Yeah, I start with the Journal of Business Research, where I have been an editor for a few years now, along with Professor Sumit Kundu. Really, over the years, the word impact has often been misrepresented, or the word impact has been construed in a way that is not very straightforward. Really, the simplistic way of impact is how has it impacted not only academia, but also the real world, in a sense, practitioners or policymakers. So how has your research, in other words, been helpful to the real world, either businesses, or how has it impacted policy that indirectly then helps, in a way, businesses? So the word impact has over the years been misunderstood. Earlier, scholars used to understand impact means the number of citations. Here, a case study in a non-ranked journal can also, over the years, have a huge impact. And so the universities across the world, UK, Australia, US, and more so now in India.
Request, I request everybody to please mute themselves. Please mute yourself. Yes.
Yeah. Yeah. In fact, the other journal that I represent is one of the first journals under the business and management disciplines to have real impact editors, editors who will be responsible purely for impact. I will explain that on my presentation on the next ones. But Vishal, do you want me to continue with this, and or you are posing questions now?
Vijay, you please go ahead and,
okay.
and speak.
Perfect. Okay, so the first journal I represent as the associate editor for strategy and organizational behavior, where Professor Sumit Kundu is also the associate editor for international business. This is publisher is Elsevier, and it is UK ABS 3-star and a ABDC A journal. Really, we position JBR in what we call the 3 I's. We are truly international, we are interdisciplinary, and we have impact in terms of what I was mentioning. So we have impactful papers and submissions and impactful publications. So let me start with the first one. Of course, when JBR started out, it was predominantly a North American journal, but over the years, last 5 years, I think we have changed that perception. So 50% of our authors are now from outside of the US. Our editorial review board, 50% is from outside of North America. Again, our associate editors are 50% from outside of North America. Two out of the 2 EICs, one is from Europe, in Norway, and the other from America. Disciplinary wise, as well, as you can see, over the years we have moved it from a predominantly marketing journal to now have multidisciplines. And we have a dedicated section on international business, for example. Also, we are planning something on only emerging markets. So we are very, very big in a sense, as you will see. We have 15 tracks and around 50% of our papers are marketing, but also more international nowadays. In fact, we have recently increased our associate editors for reasons that I will just share with you. So impact again, we are #1 when it comes to the Google Scholar H index for journals in marketing. So you can see here, we are way ahead of the second, which is a score of 66. H index, as you can see from the note here at the end, is defined as how the articles published in the last 5 years, where H is the 5-year here, and it's just like a normal H index, and journals have the same. So we are way ahead in terms of marketing, and it's similar when it comes to strategic management as well. Now, not only do we have it impact here, but also the numbers. So to have greater numbers and impact is very important. So you can see here 4,500 submissions, which is humongous, really, of which again 1,500 are for special issues. One of our strategies of our impact is to take on board really topics by scholars from across the world on which are cutting edge, and I will share a few examples in the next slides. So really 25% that's rejected by the EIC, another 25% by the associate editors, and so the acceptance rate is more or less 6 to 8%. Impact factor is close to 5. In fact, this year we were looking forward to cross the 5 mark, but possibly that'll happen next year. The 5-year impact factor, you can see the site score almost 9, and we have 12 issues, and each issue has around 25, 30 papers. And so you can see it's very big. And even if it's 6 to 8% here of acceptance, 6 to 8% of 4,500 are a lot of papers to fill up for the 12 issues. And so really it is a matter of numbers, but also keeping the quality. And that's a challenge that we face as associate editors. We get a lot of submissions and we are always on our toes in terms of keeping up that quality.
Vijay, considering your experience of the journal and this, could you also mention what kind of papers that you get are really impactful, qualities of those kinds of submissions, and also
yes, I'm coming to that on this slide. Because Vishal, I'm coming to this on this slide. So you can see here the selection of topics in 2019, and the second one here was a guest. I edited this one on outsourcing and offshoring. We received over 150 submissions, and finally 25 made the cut. 25 were published. Really, it's the topic over the years, and Sumit Kundu did a special issue on outsourcing many years ago. And from then onwards, there has been a lot of research on the topic, but really what is it that was cutting edge? And so the 25 papers were across different industries, were across different theoretical frameworks that they used. So the context, the theory, but also I think the empirical part in terms of, for example, within outsourcing, there was nearshoring. So people that looked at or backshoring, where business came back. So really, these are the new concepts, the emerging concepts that we in academia are often said to be lagging in terms of the new concepts, the new context, the use of theory in newer contexts. So this is what makes it impactful. This is what makes it exciting, is not only looking at what we used to previously do, Vishal, is look at the gaps in the theory, look at the gaps in the literature. I think more and more of that is now, of course, that's a given. It's how soon and how fast we can catch up. And I think since the March onwards, the number of papers on COVID and its impact has really shown us that we have been lagging as academics. And this is really, it is an eye-opener in a sense that really how the current scenario is impacting us and how we can use and find solutions of that as real impact. So that becomes really very important. So I think from March onwards, the number of papers that have dealt with on COVID is amazing. And a lot of good work is coming out, a lot of good discussion is happening. We are talking to businesses directly nowadays. People are looking up to academics and business scholars to find answers based on our experience. This is what should happen normally, but we had the pandemic really to remind us of that in that sense. Yeah. So these are again a selection of topics in 2019, and these are our forthcoming ones. The first one here is, all of these are live, by the way, so if you would be interested to submit to any of these. The first one is by Surinder Munjal, Peter Buckley from University of Leeds. And look at the question, what is still emerging about EMNEs? So it's really what's happening today. The second one is by Professor Budhwar, Circular Economy in SMEs. We again talking about the circular economies, but what is the role of SMEs and what are the new theoretical developments, practical challenges, and future research agenda. The third topic of knowledge hiding, for those of you who are into OB and knowledge management. Knowledge hiding has been a topic of discussion lately in business and management. Sanjay Singh, who was in Abu Dhabi and is now in Ireland, is leading on this special issue. Corruptive practices, Parvez Gauri and Vikas Kumar, who is the EIC of JIBS, is leading on that. Managing the Indian way, Devmalya Mukherjee, Professor Devmalya Mukherjee is leading on that. And the last one I'm leading on is the resource base. So you can see, Vishal, here that these are really current topics, impactful topics, something that probably will excite scholars across the world in terms of the impact. Very quickly, these are the recent changes we have made. Again, it's based on our 3 I's, being international, being impactful, and interdisciplinary. These are the 3 I's that this journal really talks about. Vishal, if I could quickly do the second one, or I pass it on and come back.
I would request, based on if you could take the second question that I had, which is generally qualities of good manuscripts that you, in your experience, if you could.
Yes, I think the 3. Yes, thank you, Mishra. So I think the first thing that we look at as editors is, what is the paper about? The title, the abstract becomes very important because as editors, as you know, time is of essence for us. So the title, the abstract, the introduction, the research questions, this should set the scene. If in 3 minutes an editor cannot see the value in that and is trying to search what is the value, what is the contribution, what is your paper about, even simple things, a lot of emphasis is not really put on the title and the abstract, but it should. The title should tell you, in a sense, what are the variables and how do you form a sentence or a statement or an inquiry. And the abstract, again, I think when I first set out in my career, one of the older professors said, the abstract is the most difficult thing to write because that is what will catch your attention. And so the abstract will tell you what your whole story is about, what your contribution is about, and how you can grab the attention within 3 minutes of the person who is looking at it to take a decision of how you take it forward. And what should then go into that very important abstract is, what is your research about? How is it adding value? What is it contributing to? I think these are the three key aspects to grab the attention of the editor and thereafter the reviewers as well.
So thank you, Vijay. I think this is very useful to set the tone, the importance. So you did mention the kind of topics which a journal like JBR is looking at, and what I could gather from what you mentioned is something out of the box and something very relevant to the current day and time in terms of topic, and also in terms of the quality. You mentioned about abstract and the importance of the research question. So we will come back to you, Vijay, again once we take the questions. Let me now go to our next panelist, and Sushant, would you want to just?
You can put up that slide.
Yes, I will do that, and you could. Yes, Professor Sumit.
Yeah. Our next panelist is Professor Sumit Kundu, and the question is about how do I make a good literature review, right? And also how do I design my study so that it addresses the question that I put in my introduction. So over to Professor Kundu.
Professor Kundu, are you there?
Yeah, he's
okay.
there.
Good morning to all of you. It's a delight and a pleasure to be in this INDAM panel on Meet the Editors, and I am very happy to basically reflect and give some of my thoughts in terms of the questions which Sushant has addressed. I've been associated with the Journal of International Business as consulting editor, along with the Journal of Business Research and Journal of International Management for the past several years. And in my experience, that it is important to write a research paper, which Vijay was attributing from the 3I perspective. It should be insightful, it should be impactful, and of course, ideally, it should be interdisciplinary. So I think it is important that that we try to understand.
Sumit, your face is not coming on the camera properly. If you could just adjust your camera a little. Oh yeah.
Yeah, now it's better.
Yeah, it is better. If you can just go a little back, that would help.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, this is perfect.
So basically, it's important that we try to understand that research, is both a science and an art. And when Vijay talked about having the 3 I's, the international, the insightful, impactful, interdisciplinary, I think these are some of the important things which we look as editors of journals. So the contribution has to be there. And from my vantage point, I'm very much interested in a theoretical contribution, because I think, at the end of the day, all this.
Excuse me, participants, can you please mute yourself? Can you please mute yourself?
So basically, what I was going to say is that it's important that we understand this research, from this perspective, interdisciplinary, impactful, and insightful. And it's important to make a good contribution, which I was talking about earlier. And for me, as a consulting editor, what I'm very much interested is in the theoretical contribution. The theoretical contribution is very important for me to see the paper's real, meaning and what contribution it is making to the field. So I think, given the fact that research is becoming very competitive, I nowadays, very much like to see very much an interdisciplinary focus. So if you're doing a good literature review, good literature review taken from different disciplines makes an addition to what we are going to talk about, how do we basically extend the conversation. So I think it is important that we basically look at fields like sociology, economic geography, psychology, political economy, different fields, to bring into what we look at in international business as an interdisciplinary framework. Now, the two important things stands out very clearly. One is when I look at the conceptual, or the theoretical contribution, I'm looking at the theoretical aspect, the theoretical contribution. And the way I look at the theoretical contribution is that is the authors giving a new theory. It's a groundbreaking theory. For example, Buckley and Cassin's work in 1976 was a groundbreaking theory on the theory of internalization. Then challenging the existing theory is another important aspect. For example, when I look at the work on emerging multinationals by Luo and Tung or by John Matthews, it was basically challenging the conventional wisdom. Same thing can be argued for international new ventures and bond globals, which was challenging the process model of Jonathan Van Ley. The third idea is about trying to synthesize idea into fresh theory. And notably, here's the work of John Dunning, which basically looked at the ownership, location, and international advantage, eclectic paradigm, and basically trying to basically bring different areas to explain the phenomenon in terms of why do multinational exist. And of course, the last part is that how do you improve the process of theory development? And looking at Jay Barney's work, and from there to David Tease's work on dynamic capabilities, are some of the things which I look at, in terms of what is the theoretical contribution and how does it build upon the literature that has been looked at very carefully. Now one thing is that a theory, basically when I look at the theory part, I'm always interested in whether it is a deductive versus inductive reasoning. So deductive is for more general to more specific. So you're testing existing theories, and the inductive part is from specific to broader generalization in developing a theory. So when I look at the work by Bartlett and Ghoshal, so it gives me that they're trying to build something new. And to me, all the seminal papers are building something new. And it's very difficult to explain that, to write on that. But again, that is how you extend the body of knowledge. How do you extend the frontiers of knowledge? So I think, you have to have a good understanding of the literature, very in-depth understanding. And oftentimes, I see a lot of meta-analysis being done on papers, which is a good way. Or if you are reading a review paper, which has covered, the review for over 100 articles, I think that's a good way to understand the field. But very importantly, for me, from my vantage point, when I look at a paper, it is very important that there has to be a theoretical contribution. Otherwise, for me, it becomes a me too approach. It just cannot be a number crunching exercise. If it's a number crunching exercise, from my vantage point, it is not making any contribution, and it is a ground for rejection. So basically, there are several elements when I look at the theory part. What's the research question, which I talked about? Very importantly, what is the research question? Is it contributing to the knowledge above and beyond what we know? What is the mode of theorizing? What is the level of analysis? What is the phenomenon looked at? What is the causal mechanism? What is the new constructs, if at all they have developed new variables? What are the boundary conditions that we're talking about? And what is the final output in terms of what are they trying to explain or predict or prescribe? So I think, all the elements makes up a good, theoretical contribution. And of course, it is very difficult to write a theoretical piece, But, even if you're writing an empirical paper, there has to be a meaningful theoretical contribution, which has to tie into your hypothesis. All the hypotheses which you've developed has to be anchored in some theoretical lens. If not, then the paper becomes a very weak paper. And also, when you discuss the results and findings, you have to tie into the theory. So I think those things are very trying to provide a coherent argument. Now, let me also talk a little bit about, what Vijay talked a little bit earlier, because as a journalist, I don't have time to read every paper. So I have to quickly skim through the abstract and the introduction. And that is a basis for rejecting a paper, because most of the papers are disrejected. 90% of papers will be disrejected, So when I'm looking at the abstract, what I suggest is that it should be short, it should be very clear, it should be consistent, it is signaling a contribution, and it is stimulating an interest. And I suggest that you should write an abstract, which Vijay was right, that is the most difficult part because in 200 words, in 200 write a good abstract. So that takes a lot of time. Oftentimes when I write papers, it takes 20, 25, 30 versions to write an abstract. And this is my advice to all my doctoral students, that they have to dedicate their time, because the editor, the action editor of the journal, will make a decision based on the abstract. And if he or she likes the abstract, then they look at the introduction. And the introduction is very important, because within 2 pages or 2.5 pages, you have to tell a story which will capture the imagination and attention of the action editor and the reviewers. So basically, the way I write a paper, when I look at introduction, I keep it to 3 paragraphs. 3 paragraphs, the first paragraph talks about, this is a conversation I want to join. So if it's the conversation on multinational performance, so what do I know and what am I basically contributing to the understanding of that phenomenon? Number 2, the second paragraph talks about why am I basically extending the body of knowledge. So I don't like to see a Me Too approach. It just cannot be an empirical testing. You have to make some significant contribution. That this is what we know, this is what the gaps are, and I'm building upon that, because this thing has not been discussed, and maybe, there are papers which talks about ideas of further research, and you may want to cite those papers to bring into your contribution, into what you're trying to contribute to explain that phenomenon. And the final paragraph, the third, which is the third paragraph, is the purpose of the paper. What is the purpose of the paper, of my writing? So I'm telling a story. A paper is telling a story in 30 pages. And the 30 pages, has to be very, coherent, concise, and of course, has to, you have to basically capture the attention and the imagination of the reviewers, because everybody's time is scarce. So what does this mean? This means that, you have to basically read whatever journal you plan to submit. For example, if you're planning to submit to a Journal of International Business Studies, then you have to read what are the topics or areas of interest which you're working on, and what are the articles that have been published in JIBS, in the past few years, because you need to cite those papers in your write-up. And of course, very importantly, as I mentioned earlier, that it is a good idea to think outside the box. That means you have to challenge the conventional wisdom, and then only it becomes impactful. So in our research, we always talk about relevance and rigor. So relevance and rigor are very important elements, right? So it has to be relevant, and relevance is being judged by insightfulness, impactfulness, and very importantly, from my vantage point, interdisciplinary. So when I look at an international business paper, I like to see that, well, it is just not economic driven or strategy driven. It has elements of organizational behavior or psychology or economic geography or sociology or political economy. How do you bring those ideas into explaining the black box? It is unraveling the black box. And that is very important. That takes time. That means you have to read a lot, because remember, all the journals, the acceptance rate is 6%, 5%.
If you could summarize, and we could go to the other panelists also.
Yeah, sure. So I'm going to conclude by saying that, what I look as an editor in terms of the important aspects for either moving the paper to the review process or just rejecting is that what is the novelty, what is the insightfulness, whether it's impactful, whether it is interdisciplinary, and very importantly, whether it is carefully crafted. This crafting of the paper, the way you are going to frame the arguments is very important. Lastly, I'm going to also, as a word of advice to all the Indian authors and Indian scholars, is that since English is not the native language, it's very important that you get a proofreader to read your paper for grammatical errors and other things. So if you follow these steps, suddenly you have a good chance of getting the papers through the review process. So on that note, I'm going to stop here. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Kundu. It was extremely insightful and comprehensive. Thank you for sharing your insights of all these years of publishing. And you mentioned various things, and starting from theory, groundbreaking, how do we at least start to think about groundbreaking work and something which is new and novel. So we will definitely have a lot of questions, and from the participants as well as from our side, and we'll come back to you. Thank you. Okay, so let me go to our next panelist, Professor David Wasieleski. And So Professor, if you could also share your insights from the work that you have been doing in terms of business ethics, and as well as your experience of handling top journals such as JB and Business and Society. So Professor Wasieleski, if you could share your insights on good manuscripts and also some bit on crafting qualitative papers or qualitative research.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Vishal. I appreciate the introduction and the welcome. I'm very happy to be here and spending the evening with so many of you. I will address the qualitative and some qualities of good manuscripts, although I don't want to repeat a lot of Sumit's insights, some fine contributions and insights there. But I'll add to it, and I'm going to speak in the context of the journals for which I review and edit. So I am the associate, I guess the founding associate editor of Behavioral Business Ethics track for Journal Business Ethics. And I think in the context of our conversation here today that this is a journal that the audience is probably a little bit more interested in. But I was just named the editor-in-chief of Business and Society Review, which is one of the major journals in our field. But I'm going to start with Journal Business Ethics. And in terms of qualitative research, I do want to say that one of the reasons this track was created at Journal Business Ethics 4 years ago, and I've been the associate editor there the whole time for this track, is the growing popularity and need for qualitative research and social science research, specifically in business ethics, business and society. So if you looked back at our journal and other journals in the field, including a lot of journals in management for that matter, qualitative research was very difficult to publish 10, 15 years ago. But now it has become more popular because the field has reached a conclusion or consensus that it's positively necessary. We need the observation. We need to get into interviews with people that are making decisions in order to pick up that subjective, qualitative part of human behavior. So to really understand human behavior, we really have to get beyond the quasi-experimental research, which is survey methods and or objective matters as those. And we need to focus on some of the subjective nature that is causing the behavior. Now, there are a lot of limitations to the qualitative research, and we can talk about that later in the question and answer, but it is growing, and both of my journals would welcome any submissions with qualitative data, qualitatively collected data, I should say. So let me give you a little bit of background on the Journal of Business Ethics, and I'll address the qualities of good manuscripts question as well in the context of my journal here. So there's a little history here that was founded in 1980, and it has really grown over the last many decades. The focus of the journal hasn't changed so much, except the narrow specific focus of it has. So it started as this public forum for discussion and debate of ethical issues. But business ethics as a field back in 1980 wasn't very well developed, and a lot of the research was just theoretical. So since then, over the past 40 years, I mean, we've seen so much develop in the ways that we collect data and develop theory. So we borrow from a lot of different disciplines in business ethics. So we borrow from their methods too. So we're borrowing from sociology and psychology. It's a multidisciplinary field. So our scope now, so now we're in modern day, the Journal of Business Ethics publishes only original articles from a wide variety of methodological and disciplinary perspectives, including qualitative, concerning ethical issues related to business that bring something new or unique to the discourse in the field. Let me emphasize quality of good manuscript. I desk reject a large percentage of submissions, mainly due to lack of fit. Our journal wants a contribution to business ethics theory and practice, and something that would be generalizable beyond a very narrow context, unless that context has specific or primary interest to the field. If it doesn't tap into the business ethics literature and build on it and contribute to the theory within different subfields of business ethics research, the journal does not want to publish it. In the past, they did. So in 1980, they would publish a lot of different things. Now we are focused primarily on this area. So what's really changed is the editorial leadership of Ben Friedman and Michelle Greenwood. So we have 50 expert high active researchers as consulting editors and section editors, of which I am one. Our principles that go into our editorial process is the respect for the author and author's voice, the respect for the reviewers. This all goes into, we practice what we preach when we're trying to publish business ethics research. We want to review and assess articles in the same vein. Our journal has done, so I encourage all of you to, if you want to learn more about this journal, that January of 18, this issue of Journal of Business Ethics, there's an editorial by the two editors-in-chief, Michelle Greenwood and Ed Freeman, that really describes the process of what they're looking for if you're interested in publishing in Journal of Business Ethics. This very short 4-page article is a very good place for you to go to see what the journal aims to achieve. So some of our initiatives here have been to have these topic sessions and a lot of special issues. So we're publishing about 16 issues a year. So there are a lot of issues, but since we're a Financial Times 50 journal, we get an enormous amount of submissions. So we've had to break down the sections, and these are just the new sections from the last year, the last 12 months that have been added, or mine is here, but this has been around for 4 years. The rest of these has been around for a year or two only. So you can see all the different areas that we tap into, and that is just the nature of business ethics research. OB, global issues, cross-cultural, there's a lot of interest here, as long as it ties back to some theory or method related to business ethics realm. You can see the section descriptions on the website too, so if you want to get a little bit more into depth into what economics and business ethics means, you can search for that on the website as well. We're doing these virtual special issues too that really tries to focus on very specific areas. There's going to be another special issue on COVID. I think a lot of journals are doing that now, but these are published online only. And there's a couple examples of it here with the sociology on the last slide and the philosophical qualitative issues on this latest virtual special issue submission. And then we have these discussion forums too, to actually talk in real time about emerging issues in business ethics. And if you went on our website, you would see some of these being listed that often leads to the development of papers. So this is one of the developmental things that our journal does. Our impact factor this is the 2018 impact factor. It's actually eclipsed 4 in the 5-year. But the FT50 really gives us an awful lot of submissions, and that's why we have so many. We have 12 regular issues and 4 special issues per year. So this is our editorial management process. In the interest here, if you wouldn't mind, my journal that
Hello, Professor Wasieleski, we have, I think there's some internet connection problem.
field.
Hello.
And to be honest, yes.
So we could not hear you for a while.
Oh, is that right? Okay. Well, right now, I just want to spend a moment to introduce my journal that I took over as editor-in-chief in January of this year. Business Society Review. The impact factor isn't as great as Journal Business Ethics. We're at a 0.86. That's what I inherited when I took it over. And my goals are to improve the breadth and scope of this. So this is, we want to get a lot more international submissions and improve the quality and impact factor of the journal. This Society Review covers a wide range of topics within the business society domain. Business ethics is just one of those subfields. And to be honest, with nearly 200 submissions I've received since taking over, I've probably only received a couple business ethics submissions. Business society realm includes stakeholder theory, social responsibility, sustainability, social entrepreneurship, B Corps, all kinds of things related to citizenship, and different issues in terms of ethics, virtue ethics, ethics issues, emerging topics like that. So the business society field is broader, and we accept a broader range of types of submission, both quantitative and qualitative, empirical or just theoretical. But we do have a broader scope than the Journal Business Ethics does in that regard, because they're really looking for the contribution to business ethics research. I'm looking more for contributions to business society research writ large. If any of you is familiar with my journal prior, this journal's been around since the 1980s as well. They accepted all kinds of opinion pieces and commentaries and things like this. I've eliminated all that. This is a scholarly journal now, and we only accept scholarly pieces that contribute theoretically to the business society research. Now, to get to the question about what we look for in good contributions and good missions for either journal, I'll tell you, since taking over my journal, Business Society Review, I have a 75% desk reject rate. That is due to quality of submissions, but also fit. You can often tell when someone has been shopping around a paper for a long time, where they're trying for a very top tier journal, and then it keeps getting rejected, so they keep trying to shop it without changing the content to fit the audience of the journal. So be aware of that. It's in Journal Business Ethics, you see submissions that obviously were failed attempts at, say, a finance journal, but then they added the word ethics to the title and they thought maybe it would fit the Journal Business Ethics. Same thing with Business Society Review. Know your audience and make sure that you address work that would be of interest to readers of that journal. So know your context, know your audience. The contribution to theory and practice is something I'm really looking for in my journal, as well as Journal Business Ethics as well. Obviously, some things, and I don't want to take up too much time and overlap on comments that Sumit had made, so I'm just going to summarize a couple of points here. Obviously, we're looking for technically correct methods. Methodology has to be technically correct and tight and clearly described. A lot of reviewers will either give a reject or a major revision to a paper that they just couldn't really get their head around what the methods were and how the data was collected. So a lot of clarity has to be made there. Obviously, the research question has to be interesting and relevant to the field and to the journal you're submitting to my previous point. Your results should be generalizable beyond a single context. That is often a cause of reject decisions. I won't necessarily reject ones that have a very narrow focus, but the reviewers normally come back saying, you know, this is great, but how does this apply to other contexts around the globe? You have to have a solid literature background. Prove to me that you know the literature inside and out, what you're contributing to, and that will make a greater case for you to make a contribution to the field. You really have to have a clear motivation and purpose up front too. And I will just reject papers, and reviewers hate papers that they don't know why it's being written. it might be interesting, it might be a cool idea, but if there's no clear motivation as to what problem you're solving, what gap in the literature you're filling, what purpose you are serving, the paper and the introduction will probably be rejected right then and there. So make sure that there's a lot of clarity and prove to the readers you know your methods, you know your literature in order to make a contribution to the field.
Thank you.
So thank you for listening.
Thank you, Professor Wasieleski. This was very useful, both the introduction to the journals as well as your insights on publishing. So let us go to our last panelist and hear from Professor Pawan. Sushanta, you would want to.
You can put up this PPT. Yeah. So I invite Professor Pawan Budhwar to share his thoughts on doing relevant and impactful work, qualities of good manuscripts, because he is an editor-chief in so many journals. I request him to share some thoughts on this. And how do we manage the review process? Most of the papers, as some of them told, desk reject is happening. How do we manage the review process? I request Professor Pawan Budhwar to share his thoughts.
Thank you, Sushanta. Thank you, Vishal.
Thank you, sir.
Good afternoon, good evening, depending where you guys are. I think so already so much has been shared about publishing. I'll briefly share some observations along the three themes, and it will be more exciting to invite questions and respond to those questions. So the first one, the impactful work, as Vijay and briefly Sumit talked about. Let me add something more to what they have been talking about. At the moment, my observation on the impact side of research is more of a fad and fashion, apart from few places where if you look at most of the journals where we want to publish, we are still seriously looking at theoretical contributions. Increasingly, we can see a tilt where more and more journals are jumping onto the bandwagon and they are asking, okay, talk about the practical implications as well. Until and unless it's a highly practitioner-oriented journal where we talk about the non-academic impact of your research. Having said that, it's important to understand what it is because it's forthcoming and it will be very soon kind of mandatory in most parts of the world. I will bring in the topic of research funding because we are talking about publishing. Along with that, we should also talk about getting research grants, which are important. And when we bring in the research grant into picture of research and publications, straight away impact becomes important. Because majority of the research grants and funders, they are asking about why would we give you money until unless you will do something which will help the real world and the real organizations. Okay? So that's on the impact side. It's a bit early for the present today's audience we have, but keep an eye what it is. And I believe in due course, this would be becoming important. The second point, can you please put that slide again, Sushanta, is about quality of good manuscripts. Okay, so we can have a long list, but what I believe when we are looking at good publications, I have a number of fundamentals on this. Okay, so a quality manuscript, I believe, should be having right from the title, the topic, whether it is really attractive, whether it is really timely, whether it is representing the research, how the research has been conducted, how the story is being shared, i.e. How engaging are your arguments presented in the manuscript, so that the reader, when they start reading your manuscript, they start and they don't want to stop. They want to carry on reading till the very end. The kind of solid contributions it will be making, So the past presenters, all of them have indicated about contributions, but I believe still it's a major challenge to fully understand the kind of contributions we talk about. So majority of us have been trained to talk about theoretical contributions and practical implications. But many a times we forget, we can also claim empirical contributions. We can also claim methodological contributions. And given we are talking to scholars based in India, we can also claim contextual contributions. Okay, so ask yourself what kind of contributions are the strongest from your research and manuscript. Highlight them. Talk about a future kind of agenda emerging from your research and manuscript. I'll also talk about be honest. Talk about limitations, but talk about the limitations not in the sense of just saying that here are my limitations. Increasingly, there seems to be a set tone which we are observing, where everyone is saying, oh, my sample is small, oh, I have a cross-sectional design, and all those things. These really look very silly. They look silly in the sense, if you were aware of all these limitations, then why did you start your research with those limitations? Okay, so be careful, but be honest in acknowledging the limitations. There are ways of acknowledging the limitations where you do highlight and acknowledge limitations, but give it a positive twist that within those limitations, your research has really helped to highlight and make those contributions. Okay, the other bit which none of the other presenters talked about, in a good manuscript, I would like to see some kind of coverage regarding the ethical issues you tackled, or how you manage those ethical issues within your research while developing a given manuscript. It's not the core, but increasingly, I believe we are heading in a direction where in future we'll be asking, already lots of journals are asking about ethics, ethical procedures followed while collecting the data and so on. But we are also going through the DORA, going through the COPE kind of principles and so on. So ethics also kind of becomes important, how you are reporting your data, how you are analyzing and so on. The last bit, very quickly on the review process. Okay, take it very, very seriously, because if you have ended up being in this situation where you have been asked to revise and resubmit a manuscript, that's half good news. Okay, all the previous presenters talked about a very low kind of acceptance rate, a very high percentage of test rejects and so on. All those things are happening. Okay, so do a very diligent job. Keep an eye on the time which has been given to you. Keep an eye all the kind of recommendations which you have been made to you by different reviewers, by the dealing editors. Don't try to ignore any one of those. Okay, some of the other bits, don't rush it. Okay, because if you are given let's say 12 weeks or so, then you have that kind of time. You ensure you do a good job. You as a author, it's your task to help the reader. Okay, in this case, the reader are the reviewers and the dealing editors. So they have given you some feedback. It's important, as I said earlier, you do a diligent job by developing a detailed response letter where you are indicating about the page number, about the paragraph, and how you have incorporated the changes and so on. So the response letter has to be very specific. And in a way, you are not letting the dealing editor or reviewer to find where it is. You have to help them. Okay, don't try to ignore what the reviewers are asking. Okay, don't try to be smart in a wrong way, where if there were 30 comments, you say, if I respond to 25, I'll be fine. No, majority of the times, the dealing editor and the reviewers, they have the past review comments in front of them, and they are checking how you have addressed each one of those. You don't always have to agree to the criticism made to your manuscript. Many a times you might realize, hang on, perhaps the reader, in this case, the reviewer or the dealing editor, they might have missed something. So in that kind of scenario, do communicate with the dealing editor and ask for clarification. So I'll say lots of things, but do a diligent job. Share it with someone else who can have a look at it if they are, as if they are acting as a kind of reviewer and so on. There are many other things. I think I'll stop here because I'm looking at the time. We are left with 25 more minutes, and it's important we invite some questions. So that will be it from my side for the time being, Sushanta and Vishal.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Yes, Sushanta will take questions.
Yes. In case you have some questions, please write in this chat and we'll try to request our panels to answer some of the questions. I got one question that they're asking is, can you talk about harking? I mean,
so speakers, panelists, if you can turn on the videos, that will be your video, and that will be helpful. And so we can see you all. And yes, Sushanta.
In case you want to ask some questions, you can turn on your video and ask the questions. But in the chat, there's some questions. Some people are saying, well, the reviewer is asking the question, which may not. I don't agree. That Professor Pawan Budhwar has already replied. You can ask the dealing editor. But if it is an integrity issue, then how to handle? That's one question coming. In case the panels can answer.
I can start if it's okay.
Yes, please go ahead.
Please go ahead.
Sure. To Naga's question in the chat about resolving issues involving an ask by the reviewer that the author may find unreasonable or affects the integrity of the paper. This is the job of the associate editor, in my opinion, to really get involved. And it often takes, I've had this problem, it often takes a thorough read of the paper and the reviewer's comments to make an assessment as to whether or not the reviewer comment would indeed affect the integrity of the author's research. Just as if you have conflicting reviews, I think the associate editor needs to serve as a judge to determine which review you're going to support. Sometimes you get a review where you're asked to do one thing by one reviewer and it contradicts what another reviewer asks you to do. So authors will come to me often asking, what am I supposed to do? And then you make the assessment that I would prefer you to go this way. And then you are charged with basically sticking up for the author to that other reviewer. Same thing here with Naga's question. I think the associate editor needs to make that assessment, and then if they agree with the author, then it's our job to stick up for the author against the reviewer.
I fully support David's perspective, because as an editor, it is our responsibility, that we are the people, who read the comments carefully, go back and read the paper again. And this is very time consuming. It's very time consuming, but we have to be very fair and ethical in the process. So oftentimes, we get conflicting reviews, and then of course we have to be the arbitrator to decide, what is the right thing to do. And if that needs be that, because we know who the reviewers are, we know and some of the reviewers may be very big names in the profession, but that does not mean that we have to agree with what the reviewer is stating on the manuscript, So we should have that moral courage to take on the reviewer and basically, at times, override them and take appropriate action to see that the manuscript moves forward, So I totally support David's perspective on this, that it is up to us as gatekeepers, to make sure that we are ethical in the whole process, and are not subjugated to any pressures from anybody. Thank you.
Professor Budhwar, please.
I was making a comment about ethics, and this is taking us back there. So the two colleagues have talked about as editors, how do we do it? But let's keep in mind as authors and as researchers, we also have an important role to play. Okay? So why we end up in these kinds of scenarios? We end up in these kinds of scenarios sometimes by accident, unknowingly, but many a times people are trying to be clever. Okay, so it's not worth to be trying to be clever in the wrong way. And one should remember we are here for a long innings. Sorry, David, this is a cricketing term if you don't understand. So which means is it's a small world, but we are here for almost 3-4 decades of our career. So if you end up creating an image which has integrity issues, then you don't stand a chance for lasting for long. Okay? Naga pointed, he wants some input on harking. Okay, it's a very useful one. It's important we understand what happens and how perhaps it's not really useful. So what happens during harking is many a times people will do their data analysis, and based on what perhaps is coming out significant and so on, they will try to develop a hypothesis or develop their set of hypotheses. So it's kind of post hoc kind of analysis, and based on that people will develop hypothesis and so on. Again, it goes back to ethics. I'll keep coming back on this, okay? Where most journals, they have their own tradition of the kind of work they will publish. They have a given kind of process which is acceptable and which is found to be robust and so on. So we are trained as doctoral students how we should be doing it. So we should be doing it the other way, where we develop an exciting research problem, we go to the field if that deserves that kind of data collection, and we are using all sorts of relevant theories to underpin the research, and accordingly we are hypothesizing and theorizing properly to develop our research hypothesis. And that's the way it should be done. But now and then we'll come across manuscripts where the hypotheses have been developed because perhaps the data is satisfying those kinds of requirements. And as Vijay was indicating, it takes us few minutes to discover that. Not always, but with experience, we can quickly find out what is happening and why it has been done that way. So unless the manuscript is done properly, and here we are talking about hypothesis developed properly, again, it doesn't give the right signal. And to the reader, in this case, the dealing editor, already in their subconscious mind, they are making a decision to desk reject the manuscript.
Professor Mishra, can I ask a question?
Yeah, please go ahead. Keep it short.
Yeah, I have also written in the question or chat box, so if that can be answered.
You can just read your question. That would be better.
So my question is that when we write a paper and when we take the data from a country where we are residing, like from Indian context, when the paper gets rejected, in my case, one paper has been rejected, citing that the findings could not be generalized. But while at the same time, I see the papers coming from Pakistan, Bangladesh, Brazil, because one tends to collect the data from the country of origin. How do we deal with this?
Thank you, Aarti. And let me also add, so there were some other questions, so we can actually add them up. So there was a question also from Gurvinder, who said, asking Professor Budhwar specifically, but it would be open to the panelists, as to how do you bring out contextual contribution. So I think this also ties up with Aarti's question.
Yeah.
So if you could take that.
Let me start, others can build on this. So the way to address this is how you have been framing your research problem, and how you are problematizing your research issue. Okay? I believe what you are indicating is perhaps the other way, where if you are able to highlight the contextual contribution. In this case, we are talking about research being conducted in India. That is a very useful start. However, we need other bits as well to this. So if it's a research related whatsoever the independent variables are linking with the performance within the organization, then we need those kinds of theoretical underpinning to base this kind of research in the right kind of literature, in the right kind of domain, and so on, where all other things are still needed, that you are making a theoretical case, you are making a lack of empirical research kind of case, you are making some kind of innovation in the methodology kind of case, but then later on you are also highlighting the unique context, which is also equally important and exciting. If you are only sticking to context, that this research has not been done in India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, or wheresoever, and believe that will sell, it will not sell anymore. It's not selling anymore for the last 5-7 years. It would have been able to, you have been able to sell it about 10-15 years ago. Okay? So going back to the message here, it's important the research is still solid on all the other parameters, which I briefly talked about, but then making the additional kind of attraction of the research, which is the contextual side. And the way to highlight the contextual contribution, perhaps you take example, some of the presenters talked a lot about the pandemic and the kind of research being pursued during the pandemic of different kinds of impacts of COVID-19 on workplace settings and so on. So here, the context can be really useful, where we understand India has the 3rd largest number of COVID cases and so on. But there are lots of indigenous aspects of dealing with COVID which are also happening. So it's not only the kind of allopathic medicine or some of the trials which are going in the big labs and so on, but there is lots of Ayurveda as well. There is lots of local kind of herbs, and all those things are also used. So if the research question was, during pandemic, what kind of medication and what kind of approach are really useful? In the case of India, apart from all other things, here are lots of indigenous ways of doing things. That's the context. That's the usefulness you are telling the world, which perhaps is not happening, but the success rate of those things are really important. So to summarize, we need all the important parameters needed for a good manuscript, but then adding the contextual side on top of that. Not simply sticking to the context is novel, that's why it's worth doing, but we need all other bits as well.
Thank you. Very good. Srikanth, you have
said, let me just add to what Pawan said. It's important that for top tier journals, so obviously context, is important, but the paper will not sell just by context itself. So let me give you an example, especially in a journal like Journal of International Studies, JIBS, where the acceptance rate is 5%. Just selling that it's a paper in India. I'm reviewing a paper in India right now as we speak. It's nothing new, what I'm reading. And so obviously I know what the outcome will be on this paper. So the issue is that, you have to basically make some, insightful, a novelty has to be there. So many years ago, this emerging market multinationals became a novelty item. But when you look at Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa, the BRICS, so what is so novelty about the Indian multinationals? Unless you are able to frame it properly in terms of why the Indian multinationals are very idiosyncratic, they're very unique, they're very novel, they're very different from Brazilians or Chinese or Russians or South Africans, then only it will be a meaningful story to be told. So just by saying that, oh, this is a paper in India, will not take the paper to the next level. So you have to be creative, So that is where I think, that whether the richness of the paper is on the front end or the back end, and you have to understand the front end contribution, the back end contribution. What is the holistic contribution? See, the problem which I see the Indian scholars, they are very good with numbers, and they think that by number crunching, they can get a paper accepted in a good journal. A good journal will look at the front end very carefully. What is the front end contributing towards the body of knowledge? What is the boundary conditions being challenged? Are they being extended? If not, it will be a very difficult sell. So you have to be realistic in terms of whether this paper is really worth a shot in SMJ or Oxscience or JIBS or Journal of Business Venturing is one of the top journals. If not, you have to be realistic in terms of how to basically position the paper. So framing the argument is one thing, and positioning the paper is other thing. And this two oftentimes goes hand in hand. So be careful in terms of what you wish for, but you have to think very, very creatively. You have to give it. What is the novelty out there? How insightful, how impactful it is, And of course, as I mentioned earlier on, the relevance and rigor, both those R's has to be there. So as editors of journals, we have to look, what is the relevance of study, how impactful, So just content by itself will not sell, And nowadays I see paper, just it is on emerging markets. So that will not cut it. That will not cut it. Anyway, I'm going to stop here. I will let my fellow panelists share their views.
Can I quickly add something to Sushanta?
Yeah, please go ahead.
Yeah, just adding to what Pawan and Sumit just said. The context is unique because of 1, 2, 3, 4, what it is. Just merely saying it has not been done in an Indian context, and here is a rich Indian data set that leads to what? So if you come up with 3 or 4 very good arguments of why that context is important, how it can not only be generalized, but you are bringing out something new that Pawan is talking that has not been looked at from that context. So go deeper into understanding why the context is important. Merely stating that it's the Indian context will not suffice. That's one. I think the second important point is to understand is how do you then place that context in respect or compare it with other contexts. So even if you want to look at the South Asian context and say, in India, this is different than like the person asked recently, Bangladesh or Pakistan or Nepal, even in the local context, how is it comparing? So you need to compare the context and then bring out the reasons why that context is important, A, B, C, D. That becomes very important.
Thank you.
Yeah, just to add very quickly to Vijay's point, I agree completely. Just one thing that came to mind in my business and society kind of research, some authors I've seen will use Hofstede. I know there's some debate now whether or not how relevant this is, but have your context and then see what your country's context, how it is similar to Vijay's point to other nations with the different variables, regarding power distance and such from that model that you could possibly generalize to other countries as well, maybe to make a more broad contribution. It's not always, possible, of course, but I've seen this happen, and sometimes it's appropriate.
I'm collating some questions and asking this question on behalf of others. Probably last question to my panelist. How to develop a theoretical paper? I mean, I request the panel member who can, anyone can answer this question. Or maybe do's and do nots in a qualitative theoretical paper.
Yeah, especially coming based on reading of the literature. How do you develop a new propose a new theoretical piece, reading on literature, not collecting any data per se,
novelty, yeah,
but writing a useful theoretical piece.
So let me take on this question because since most of the papers which I review has a theory very strong bend on theoretical framing, So important issue is that, one way, is that you look at some current phenomena that is happening. For example, Pawan talked about COVID-19, Vijay talked about COVID-19. So does the existing theories, can basically embrace what is happening in the external environment? So obviously, most of the research which we are working on look at the organization level. And of course, if you're doing a multi-level analysis, whether that phenomenon can be addressed using a particular theoretical lens in that level. And of course, that is where I think there is a scope for people to contribute something new, to embrace some ideas, And the reality is that we have been trained. All of us have been trained in a particular discipline. Now we have to have an open mind by embracing other disciplines also. So in my example earlier, I said that, well, if I'm doing research on international business, I should be very much open to ideas from organizational behavior, or sociology, or economic geography, or psychology, or political economy, and to bring them to look at how firms behave, right? So I think that is very important, that is the way you basically start to challenge what I define as conventional wisdom. Conventional wisdom. For example, I'll give one small example, and I'll stop here, which is that, for example, historically, the IB research has looked at the process model, Johansson and Valner's work of 1977. Very well received, but that was challenged by 1994 by two authors called Ben Oviatt and Patricia McDougall, because they framed the argument from something called international new ventures. And so I think, that is where you start to question in terms of, that the existing frameworks may not suffice to explain every aspect of organization. So you may want to basically put forth something new. So I think there is an opportunity for that. You have to have a good understanding. And I always tell my doctoral students, look at what is out there. Look at what is happening out there. And how do you bring those ideas into the existing theories which are being talked about? Whether it's a resource-based view, whether dynamic capabilities, whether it is the internalization theory or what have you. So I think that way you can be able to start to have a dialogue and a conversation on developing a new theoretical framework or to have a meaningful contribution. Thank you.
Professor Pawan.
Yeah, if I can add a few more bits to this. One is writing theoretical papers is not an easy thing. Okay. Second one is go and read. There are lots of established journals which only write theoretical conceptual pieces. So AMR is a wonderful example. And there are increasingly more and more review journals which are also not only a simple kind of review, but they are asking about theoretical contributions in a way which you are helping to advance a given theory and so on. So Academy of Management Annals is one. Apart from AMR, there is International Journal of Management Reviews and many others. So the important question here is, what would be the contribution of such a paper? Okay, so you can't go and create new theories on a daily basis, on a regular basis. It's extremely challenging. Okay, so what you will end up doing is you might be developing lots of mechanisms which are helping to take the field forward, which might be helping to add some bits to the existing kind of theories and so on. So when you are thinking of developing that kind of manuscript, it's important to ask yourself, what would be your contributions look like? Okay? So in most cases, Sumit pointed out one, perhaps you might end up developing a new framework. Okay, that new framework would be helping to guide future kind of research. Okay, where future empirical research can be conducted based on that kind of framework. You might be contributing new propositions where you can go in future and empirically examine those propositions, or you might be proposing new kind of creative methodologies, okay, which will again help to examine a given research phenomenon based in some kind of existing theories which have not been examined in that particular way. Okay? So go and read from some of these journals, but the bottom line will always come back the kind of contributions you might be making. And it's important from the beginning, try to ask yourself, if here is a list of, let's say 8 or 10 different kind of contributions, which one of these you will be making? The last point on this, lots of leading journals, right from AMR to AMJ to IJMR and many other journals, look at the editorials done by their editors. So these guys are regularly talking about not only contributions, but different sections, but different approaches one can adopt to write some of these kinds of papers we are talking Here we are talking about theoretical papers, but they also talk about empirical papers, about writing abstract, about writing introduction, writing conclusion, and so on.
One question that has come up, which is, I think, very relevant. This is about the review process, and I see David, Vijay, you have responded to this. So this comes from a scholar in India, and she is asking, a lot of journals actually ask for reviewer names. Is that taken seriously by the journals? And second is, should you write paper with an exemplar set of authors in mind? And how is this taken? Because a lot of times we are asked to give names of reviewers to whom this paper should be sent out. So Professor Wasieleski and Professor Pereira, if you would want to take a shot on this. You have written already, but quickly if you would want to speak on this.
David, do you want to go first? Yeah.
Sure. Thank you. I'll be brief in the interest of time here for all of you. I think perhaps a more productive approach. So I'm assuming your question relates to some of the big names in the field. You're working in that space.
This is
and you want to get
people whom we would be citing in the paper. And so,
sure.
For example, if I cite somebody's work and I know that that person is currently working in that field, and when I'm submitting the paper to the journal, I'm asked to give some names of the reviewers. So
I see. Okay, so this is even simpler than I thought. First of all, you may, if you're still developing the paper, you may want to reach out to some of those people that you cite for a friendly review. A lot of senior scholars are very happy to do that. Don't expect a 100% success rate on that. People are busy, but that might be a nice approach to get some friendly feedback. And then if you get that friendly feedback, you cannot use that person to request them as a reviewer. Yes, a lot of journals ask for recommended reviewers. Yes, it's quite appropriate to recommend reviewers that you've cited in your paper. That's often how, as an associate editor, I find reviewers. I will look in the reference list and say, okay, this person's an expert in this area, and I'll reach out to them myself.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah, just very quickly adding to what David was saying, is that I think as authors, you need to know a group of scholars who are experts on that. Now, for example, if you're on dynamic capabilities, doesn't mean you reach out to David Thies every time. In a sense, you need to look at who are the people who have been publishing using dynamic capabilities. The other key thing is to look at, now going back to the context. So we have, for example, somebody who has been publishing using this particular theory or using this particular argument over a period of time on a particular context, and yours links back to that context. So who are these group of people? Because always you will not have the experts readily available, and there comes a time where conflict of interest kicks in, as David was saying. So there are a whole host of things that you need to remember, but it's always very important to understand this group of scholars who you can pick from, again, who don't have this conflict of interest with you and your paper. I think Pawan wanted to say something.
Yes.
I want, if we have time, otherwise I'm okay.
No, please go ahead, sir.
Yeah, so the only other thing I will add is most journals ask you as authors to nominate reviewers, but it's not mandatory. Okay, as a junior faculty or a earlier career scholar, you might not be fully comfortable in nominating reviewers, so you don't have to. The second side of this is, which we have done some analysis with our journal, where our observation is quite interesting and a bit scary, where what we have seen is most of the times we will try to pick up one nominated reviewer. Most of the times this reviewer turns out to be the most critical. So be careful whom you are nominating, believing that you are nominating a well-wisher and they will be really constructive and helpful. So majority of the times, if they are from kind of your extended network, many times they might not be very helpful. But of course, as editors, we'll do a quick search and find out if they are the experts in the field or not. So a few things on this. So you don't have to really nominate if you are not comfortable, but be careful whom you nominate. Not always your close friends, because we'll find out very quickly and most likely will not go for them.
Thank you. Vishal, you are mute here.
Yeah, so I think we would end the session, and it was extremely insightful. Thank you, all of you, Professor Budhwar, Professor Kundu, Professor Wasieleski, and Professor Pereira, for taking out time from your busy schedules and sharing insights with scholars from India and people who are interested in India-based research. Indian Academy is a body which was an affiliate of Academy of Management and is trying to promote and connect Indian scholars, research in the Indian community, and connect scholars from India with academicians around the world. So in this respect, this panel discussion on high quality publishing was an effort to provide insights to scholars, and there were some wonderful suggestions that have come out, starting from how do you develop papers, how do you position your contributions. We got from you, all of you represent great journals, very popular and renowned journals. So listening to you about the journal and the kind of things that happen in the background, what are the things that you look for as associate editors and editors of the journals, it is something that is really, really useful. There were lots of questions, and I could, so personally, some of my takeaways I could mention from being impactful research. I think one of the very useful insight was about thinking about research funding and research grants more seriously. Because the moment you think about research funds and research grants, the importance of impact and relevance automatically comes in. There was topic about shopping the paper. So even if you are trying out your paper at different journals, it is important to keep the audience and context in mind, and being able to show the fit of the paper to the journal that you are interested in sending. I think that is something that is very useful. And then various things that were talked about, starting from contribution to theory, writing correct methods, doing correct methods, clear descriptions, generalizability of findings and contributions. So there were lots of insights, and not just what was being said. I was also monitoring the chat. There are lots of very, very useful suggestions that you all have put in the chat. One thing I could also highlight is the importance that Professor Kundu has written, is to start sending out papers to reputed conferences for feedback, start attending recognized and renowned conferences, and also start reviewing papers for journals as ad hoc reviewers. So that is very, very useful suggestion. What Professor Wasieleski also mentioned is sending out papers for friendly reviews. Make an effort. Hopefully, I think things may turn out well, and you may get some good suggestions of your. So once again, thank you very much for taking out time. It was a pleasure and honor listening to you all. Sushant, if you would want to say anything.
No, on behalf of INDAM, we thank you for your time, especially the panelists for giving us insightful thoughts and very good insights about how to write, also some way motivating us to write. Also, from our participants' point of view, we need to do research. We need to show the other world, yes, we can and we should, right? And INDAM is the way to connect both, right? So thank you very much for sparing your time. To some of us, good evening. To some of us, good morning. And to some of us, good night. Thank you. Stay safe and stay blessed.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Vishal and Sushanta.
Thank you, sir.
Yes. Bye-bye.
Thanks,
Thank
Vishal.
you.
Thanks,
Thank you.
Sushanta.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you,
Thank you.
Sushant. Thank you, Vishal. Namaste.
Thank you.
Namaste. Thank you, sir.
Hey, Vishal, if
Namaste,
you can
Naga.
stay back. Hey, man.
Thank you.
If you can stay back for like just 2 minutes.
Sure.
Thank
You're
you.
going to turn off the live session so that we don't go live